Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted that you joined us for today's webinar. I'm Dr. Karen Philbrick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. We are a university transportation center focused on improving the mobility of people and goods. We accomplish our goals through surface transportation research, education, workforce development, and technology transfer. To that end, we lead 3 competitively selected multi-university consortia, all focused on improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's transportation systems. It's our pleasure to bring today's webinar to you, where we explore the dynamic challenges faced by transit agencies and bus manufacturers as the U.S. public transportation sector moves toward a more sustainable, zero emissions future. A very, very timely topic, of course. We're joined by 2 experts, and that's Leah Foecke and Zach Karson from the Rebel Group. Now, you have seen their written biographies in the promotional materials. Their bios will also be dropped into chat. We invite you to read those, but we're going to launch right into the content. So, speakers, please take it away.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you all of our attendees for being here today. So just getting started, I think we'd like to hark back to the report published in 2016 by the Mineta Transportation Institute that focused on the overall transit bus manufacturing industry. We're nearly 10 years on from the publication of that report, but that report's conclusions about the overall small market, the challenging business environment, volatile demand, and the risks of consolidation remain relevant today. Despite the major political and policy changes over that same period since the 2016 report, key policy factors are also remarkably steady. So the influence of Buy America, procurement regulation, the importance of disability access, minimum useful life for transit vehicles, and more are still a big part of the conversation. Despite these stable factors, the industry is also undergoing a generational transition to new fuel and technology types, specifically battery electric and/or fuel cell electric buses. Some agencies have made impressive progress towards their zero-emission transition, but many are also struggling to reach their targets. This report offers a practitioner's perspective. It's grounded in insights from our work directly with transit agencies, research discussing with state, local, and federal agencies and funders. It provides updated information on key trends in the U.S. transit bus market in the face of the zero-emission transition and an understanding of the transition dynamics, challenges, and suggested solution areas. We invite you to take a look at this report, but we're going to give you a few highlights as well as move into a Q&A section after the webinar. The demand side of the ZEB market is primarily made up of the thousands of transit agencies and other transit providers in the United States. So while large transit agencies provide the vast majority of transit trips in the United States, so for example, more than 40% of transit trips nationwide are in the New York metropolitan area, these large transit agencies are generally at the forefront of the transition and deploying zero-emission vehicles. However, there are many more small agencies than large transit agencies. So for example, out of the almost 3,000 reporting agencies in the National Transit Database, over 2,400 of them are classified as smaller agencies. These agencies have fewer vehicles and employees, but they also use different types of smaller vehicles and service longer routes in very different geographic areas. So we want to highlight the point that, of course, transit is diverse. It is not a monolith. There is not one type of customer. One important aspect of this diversity is highlighted in the center chart on this slide. So when most people picture a transit vehicle, they think of a standard 40-foot low-floor transit bus. But other vehicle types, so primarily cutaways and vans that are shown in the photo on this slide, make up nearly half of vehicles for transit agencies on the road today, making them extremely important and often overlooked. This chart also illustrates the general size of the U.S. transit market, so in the order of 130,000 transit vehicles on the road today. So I want to contrast this with, for example, the Class 8 truck market, which has millions of vehicles on the road in the United States. Overall, this is a small market despite the very critical service that transit agencies provide. Finally, zero-emission buses, both electric and hydrogen fuel cell, represent a bit over 7,000 out of these about 130,000 vehicles today. This number is growing every year, but it shows there's a long way to go to get to a full transition. somewhere in the neighborhood of 95% of transit vehicles on the road today are yet to transition, although the data about the full deployment of zero-emission transit vehicles, especially for those smaller agencies, is not perfect. Market concentration and consolidation is a key aspect of the United States ZEB market that, as we mentioned earlier, has been present for a number of years. As recently as 2022, 4 companies were supplying heavy-duty zero-emission buses in the United States. Today, there's only 2 that remain substantially in the same form, supplying those full-size, for example, 40-foot transit buses. There's a functional duopoly for battery electric buses and a monopoly for fuel cell electric buses. We hear in the market that this could be changing in the future, in the coming years, but as of now, there's a very small number of suppliers that are offering FTA-compliant zero-emission transit buses. This intense concentration is not common to all markets internationally, though. For example, in Europe, the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, individual market shares are showing a continuous decline as the market continues to diversify. Between 2021 and 2024, there have also been a number of recent hugely disruptive events. I'll mention a few of them. I'm sure there are many others that folks can bring to mind. The major electric bus supplier BYD's US market access has been limited due to its relationship with China and federal regulation. There have also been 3 other suppliers, specifically Novabus, Proterra, and Eldorado, which have either faced bankruptcy or exited the US transit market due to supply chain and profitability challenges, something we'll talk about later. Remaining suppliers are also reporting challenges supplying the US market successfully. So some of you may remember the February 2024 White House Roundtable on this topic, which was convened in partnership with FTA and APTA. This focused on the challenges for financial viability and competitiveness for manufacturers in the US transit bus market. Despite these challenging economic fundamentals, manufacturers will also need to grow dramatically to fuel the transition. We mentioned earlier, more than 95% or somewhere in the neighborhood of 95% of transit vehicles are yet to transition. While transit agencies purchased over 10,000 vehicles annually between 2014 and 2022 on average, in recent years, ZEB manufacturers have only supplied about 800 vehicles per year. Clearly, there's a gap in terms of supply. We also want to highlight the topic of ZEB costs. This is a key topic that comes up quite a bit. We will note here that we're focusing primarily on upfront sticker costs of zero-emission buses, although there are ongoing operational and maintenance costs as well. So one of the key output measurements of a market is the market price of a good. That's something that we're focusing on here with the market price of a zero-emission bus. For ZEBs, the market prices are substantially higher than for conventionally fueled vehicles, as shown in the chart. BEVs can be twice as expensive as internal combustion engine vehicles, and fuel cell electric buses can be even higher. These costs have also not fallen as fast as observers and researchers once thought they would. So just as a small example, in 2016, there was a fact sheet by Sierra Club quoting an expectation that battery electric buses would fall to below $500,000 by 2025, roughly on parity with where an internal combustion engine bus price is now. That's obviously not what we've seen. We heard that bringing the ZEB market to scale and maturity can decrease prices, but most in the market don't expect that scale alone can achieve this price parity that we're striving for. So why are ZEBs so expensive if it's not only market maturation? There's a few important factors. I'll highlight a few of them, although there are many others that we could bring to bear and I'm sure have a fruitful discussion about. One is general macroeconomic pressures. Of course, an inflationary environment can increase prices. There's also a perceived price insensitivity on the part of transit customers, which means that customers may not be as sensitive to changes in price, may not be pressuring manufacturers for the lower cost products. There's also extensive customization. For example, one study showed that California agencies buying the same battery electric bus model paid widely varying prices between $800,000 and $1.3 million for one bus due to add-ons, upgrades, changes, and other customizations. There's also policy and regulatory factors, notably Buy America. This is often pointed to, particularly due to the availability of some less expensive models of battery electric buses and fuel cell electric buses internationally. So for example, battery electric bus prices are in the range of €500,000 in Europe, which is about half of the observed price in the United States on average. This gap requires further study. It's not a simple comparison between the two, but there is an indication that there are international differences that require further consideration. Finally, there's a potential risk premium that we would think about due to the uncertainty of long-term performance, the risk to manufacturers to maintain warranties on vehicles. All of these factors could be baked into a higher overall purchase price for zero-emission buses.
So in addition to the costs and the market supply challenges that Leah just spoke to, there are several other important challenges that the report highlights that focus on the practitioner's perspective of how ZEBs are actually implemented by transit agencies. The first one is that there are certain models of zero-emission bus that are not commercially available today. We showed earlier how important smaller transit vehicles like cutaways are for certain transit agencies, particularly rural transit agencies. But there are no commercially available fuel cell cutaways or over-the-road coaches, and that really constrains those transit agencies' pathways to transition to zero emissions. Next, performance variability and uncertainty, and particularly with respect to range of buses. Over the long term, this is perceived by many transit agencies as highly uncertain, whether rightly or wrongly. A lot of the OEMs do acknowledge that vehicle performance can vary significantly and depends a lot on context such as weather and terrain. It also depends a lot on the operator. So how the bus driver drives the bus really matters on the range of the bus. And so some transit agencies cite differences of 10 to 20% in fuel efficiency simply based on who is driving and their technique. We're still learning quite a bit about midlife refurbishment costs, battery degradation, maintenance costs, and end-of-life performance, and all of that contributes to some of that variability. Next, in terms of scaling from a pilot to a full fleet, many ZEB deployments today really are limited pilots. But running a few ZEBs as a pilot on the easiest to transition routes is not the same as operating an entire ZEB fleet. When an agency only has a few ZEBs, an unexpected problem is manageable. But this is quite different when the percentage gets higher or when an agency has all ZEBs. And finally, the required operational changes and specialized knowledge and workforce is a key issue for transition. This is not a plug-and-play exercise where you swap out an internal combustion engine bus and just put in a zero-emission bus. There are changes that are required in routing and scheduling, in driving, as I've mentioned, in training and staffing, the layout and the infrastructure requirements on the bus yards, safety procedures, changes to maintenance schedules, and a lot more. So many transit agencies, especially smaller agencies and rural agencies, don't always have the knowledge, resources, and staff to undertake all of these functions effectively. Now I'll highlight just a few solution areas that are mentioned in the report. There are many others also mentioned in the report, but we wanted to summarize just a few for this webinar. So first, sharing the savings of lower cost ZEBs with transit agencies. Agencies are not always incentivized to be strongly price sensitive due to the way that they receive grants and fund their capital projects. This could potentially be tweaked to better optimize for lower costs over other preferences such as custom features. Next, targeting funding toward the total cost of ownership for ZEBs. Similarly, funding for capital and operations for zero-emission buses is typically separate. So there are a few sources of additional operating dollars for ZEBs. And this can really constrain transit agencies if they can't afford to operate ZEBs sustainably. And that's holding a lot of agencies back from deployment. Next, investment in R&D and targeted market development support. So there are many gaps in market offerings as we've spoken to, but some really could be addressed with targeted R&D or incentives for OEMs to catalyze the development of certain vehicle types, such as fuel cell cutaways or over-the-road coaches. Next, transferring performance risk to vendors and considering alternative delivery contracting options. ZEB deployment is a very risky proposition for transit agencies today, and where vendors can and should be asked to take on more of this risk, they're able to do that when they're able to better manage some of these risks. They should be asked to do that. Next, open source repository of training materials. So OEMs often struggle to provide foundational ZEB knowledge and safety training to transit staff who are often starting from scratch, starting from zero, have no knowledge of ZEBs. It'll be important that training does more than relying on OEM training, and that then frees up the OEM training to focus on diagnostics and troubleshooting for specific vehicle types. So an open source repository can help agencies establish their own training programs and move away from reliance on OEM training programs. Finally, streamlining access to experts. As we've mentioned, there's a lot of knowledge necessary for a zero-emission transition. Many agencies don't even know where to begin to write the RFP to hire the consultant to help them with their transition plan. So transit agencies need easier access to contract vehicles that can help them access that expertise. One example is a state-level bench contract. Some of these types of solutions have been implemented, but more are needed at a wider scale to help agencies make the transition. So with that, that concludes the presentation portion of our webinar, and I will hand it back to Karen, Dr. Philbrick, for the Q&A.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing those compelling findings. I want to invite anybody who's participating to drop their questions into the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we will try to get to all of them today. But we did have some questions pre-submitted, but before I launch into those, I need to do a very special welcome to several guests. We have former Federal Transit Administrator Nuria Fernandez joining us today. Nuria, thank you for being here. We also have my dad joining from Ukiah, California, among our other researchers, board members, and friends. Thank you all. This is very meaningful. So to our researchers, the first question that was submitted is, what are the most significant technological barriers transit agencies face when deploying ZEBs, and how are they being addressed?
It's a great question. So we've highlighted a number of barriers here. Obviously, those transition challenges are a key part of the report. A few that we'd like to bring to the forefront for discussion here. One is the importance of utility access and grid constraints, particularly for the agencies that are moving towards battery electric bus deployment. The availability of reliable power where they need it, when they need it, at an affordable price is a key barrier for many agencies who now are facing potential delays and issues with their transition due to utility and grid constraints. Another is with the bus and infrastructure performance itself. So as we noted, there are key risks with new technology. We're still learning about especially the long-term performance of both vehicles and infrastructure, understanding how batteries degrade, potentially looking to new and better battery technologies, and being able to have, for example, plug-and-play spare parts that allow easier repair and maintenance of vehicles. They're all key components to this equation.
Very good. Thank you for that answer. Let's go right into the next one. Do you feel the CARB 2030 mandate a hard deadline since electric buses are in high demand? Is it achievable?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So as of right now, these purchase requirements, so the CARB mandate, as that you suggested, is really a purchase requirement. Agencies must only purchase zero-emission buses after a certain deadline. We don't think these are expected to change dramatically. There will be some off-ramps due to vehicle availability. CARB may issue some waivers if some of these transit agencies, let's say that require cutaways, are not able to access those in the market. But generally, policymakers and industry are expecting that manufacturing will need to scale up to meet this demand that's coming from these types of mandates. Right now, this scale up is leading to relatively long wait times for buses. So we've seen over 2 years sometimes that transit agencies need to wait to access buses after they've issued a purchase order, as well as the high prices and the other dynamics that we discussed in this report. So we'll see if other states besides California issue similar mandates that may also have an impact on demand over the course of the entire country.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things one of the biggest challenges facing our industry is the workforce shortage. And of course, according to the American Public Transportation Association, 43% of our current operators are 55 years and older. So that brings us to our next question. Your research highlights the gaps in workforce capacity. What workforce development initiatives are most important to ensuring that transit agencies have the expertise needed for a successful transition? This is a tough question.
It is. And I wouldn't say that we have all of the answers. The industry is definitely looking for innovative solutions and leadership on this issue. I would refer back to something that we talked about in the solution areas, which is the open source repository for training materials. Something that allows transit agencies to more easily stand up their own workforce development and training programs would really be impactful in this regard. But I think that this issue is much larger than just zero emission. So on the zero emission side, focusing on establishing that foundational knowledge, that baseline zero emission safety training, so that when agencies do get that first bus on their lot, they're ready and they can get from the OEMs a more advanced level of training instead of needing to start from scratch. Also working with the unions, the local educational institutions, community colleges, that's going to be critical, and establishing buy-in throughout these organizations that zero-emission buses are the future, they will be coming, and there will be some new skill acquisition that will be needed to operate these new fleets. But I think it's important to mention that more work is needed to make transit an attractive career path broadly. So not just for zero-emission technicians or operators, but more work needs to be done to help make recruitment and retention of transit jobs to strengthen that across the industry.
That is a very good point. In fact, last week I was giving a keynote address and I asked the audience of 500, how many people knew they wanted to be in transportation? Guess how many raised their hand? Three. So we need to tell the story better about the good jobs available in transportation. So tell me, what can we do to attract foreign OEMs to invest or build in the United States?
So this is a tough question.
Yeah.
And given the economic factors that we highlighted in the report, the challenges that are facing the current domestic manufacturers and the OEMs that are in the market right now, we see that this would require interventions that actually shift the economics of the market, the equation that suppliers and commercial players are facing when they look to invest and enter into a marketplace. So this could mean incentives, demand-side initiatives. We should also recognize that initiatives like the CARB mandate, although there are many views about the importance or the difficulty of regulatory solutions, it did send a clear market signal for OEMs to say, we understand that there will be vehicles that will be purchased in the coming years. So understanding the scale and size and nature of demand can be incredibly important information for manufacturers to be able to accurately plan their business and make investments. We also want to note something that doesn't get as much attention, which is about basically the soft costs of engaging with transit with public agencies. So when you think about what it takes for an OEM to be competitive, to be able to work with transit agencies or other public agencies, that means engaging with public procurement processes. That means contract negotiations that, for example, incorporate FTA terms. All of those elements can be small frictions in the process to engaging in a market. They add costs, they can add time, and some of those things can make one market marginally sort of on the edges more or less attractive than another. So I think all of these elements, financial incentives, policy, the experience of working with transit can all be part of the solution here to thinking about how we might be able to better access the foreign expertise, the best-in-class international models, and think about not just the ZEB transition in the United States, but how we can leverage the best that is available internationally.
Very good, thank you. And we had a question about school buses, and I'll read this verbatim. I understand that you are focusing on transit agencies, but I'm curious how school buses fit into this conversation and future research. Is there any opportunity to rely on some of the new school bus technology to uplift this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something that we've seen in the school bus market is there is more standardization for vehicles, and that has helped a lot to drive down some of the costs and to remove some of the frictions that Leah was just talking about. It is a different market than the transit market. Of course, there are some overlaps on certain components, some of the same needs around infrastructure, some of the same needs around workforce training and the operations. But we do see that some of the same challenges that are in the transit market just aren't present in the school bus market, which has been moving a little bit faster.
Very good. Leah, would you like to add anything to that response?
Yeah, I think there's just one other element to highlight, which is I think it's a really important question in that it highlights that while this report did take a specific view on the transit bus market, the overall zero-emission transition will affect all medium heavy-duty vehicles, which is the class where we would put school buses and Class 8 trucks and drayage trucks and many of the vehicles active on ports and all of these other vehicles that fuel our economy. It will also incorporate many of the advancements happening on the light-duty side, for example, with passenger cars. We see all of these as connected in a larger ecosystem and mutually reinforcing. So when you're thinking about the grid investments that will make it easier for transit agencies to charge their battery electric buses, those same investments will advance the state of the passenger car electric market, which will also mean that there will be more investments in development of better batteries. So all of these things will be mutually reinforcing, and I think it is incredibly important to not just look in a vacuum at one sliver of the market, especially given the size of the transit market, and understand how we can learn from, borrow from, and also catalyze other elements of the heavy-duty zero-emission transition.
Mm-hmm. So it will uplift all modes. So we have a question. You mentioned the grid and you mentioned infrastructure. We have a very specific question. What strategies should transit agencies adopt to support the transition in terms of charging infrastructure and grid capacity?
Yeah, one strategy for this that we hear often from other experts in this space is really the need to engage with the electric utility as early and as often as possible to understand the grid constraints, to understand timelines, and to factor all of these pieces of information into the planning process. Another key suggestion for transit agencies is to look at their regional planning process. So to go beyond just transit in the region and think about other entities that may be facing a need for more electric power in the decade ahead, and to integrate transit's needs into that broader regional planning process. The more we can do that, the more we can ensure that the future needs of transit with respect to the grid are accounted for and help to reduce some of these really long delays that many agencies face with respect to dealing with their utilities.
Thank you for that. And it's 12:29. So with that, our time together has come to a close. Please join me in thanking Leah and Zachary for a fine presentation. We're very grateful that you shared your expertise today. And one last note before we go, please join the Mineta Transportation Institute on Wednesday, May 21st, as students from our Masters of Science in Transportation Management program present their final capstone research projects. It's an interactive event where you have opportunities to meet the students, ask questions about their research, and potentially give them an employment line of opportunity. So we hope you'll join us on May 21st. Have a great day. Thanks so much for your time.